Hello gourd friends, and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, it is nice to have you here in my gourd art channel, in my gourd art studio. Today I'm going to be talking to you about some hints and tips on getting started with something that's very near and dear to my heart, which is gourd pyrography. And if you are brand new to gourd pyrography and maybe you have a few gourds and you got your tool and you're just wondering, well, where do I go now? What do I do? What's the best practices? I'm just going to give you 10, maybe 11 hints and tips on some good practices with gourd pyrography, some things that I've learned over the 25 years that I've been doing this craft. So why don't we just go ahead and not listen to me ramble and get started. So the first thing that I want to talk about today is choosing the right gourd for burning. So the number one thing that you want to look at is you want to make sure that your gourd is clean on the outside. Now, many times when you go to a gourd farm, some gourd farms will already sell their gourds cleaned, and that's wonderful. But sometimes they're not cleaned, and if you are brand new, you might think that they're clean, but they still have their skin on, and you need to scrub that off. So that's number one. You want them to be clean. Also, you want them to have a nice, even shell. So I have one right here that I'm going to show you that has a nice, even shell. So this one has very few markings. It's very smooth, and it's fairly light in color. Gourds can really vary in whether or not if they've been green clean, they'll be very light in color. If they're allowed to dry naturally, which most gourds do just dry naturally, they can develop a lot of dark spots on them, and I'm going to show you what that looks like right here. See, this gourd has a lot of dark spots, and this would not really be ideal to work with, and it is a very pretty gourd. Now, that being said, sometimes this is preferable to you. If you want to look at the markings on the gourd and you might see something in the markings that you're going to burn around and maybe kind of pull that design out that you see, kind of like seeing an image in a cloud. There are some gourd artists that will look at these lovely markings and they'll actually purposefully choose one with a lot of markings on it, and then they will do a design based on that. So there's a little bit of caveat there, but if you are brand new and you have a design that you want to put on a gourd and you don't want any distracting marks, you want to look for one that is more like this. You want to make sure that it has a smooth shell. If you run your hand over it, doesn't have a lot of lumps and bumps, and it has a nice even shell. Okay, number two is sanding. Usually I will sand all of my gourds before I start working on them, and when I say sanding, I mean very lightly with a very fine grit sandpaper. So I will not sand with anything coarser than a 400. Sometimes I'll go as high as 600. I've even used a 1200 on my gourds if I want a nice smooth finish. Now, that being said, it is possible to over sand your gourds, and you have to be careful not to do that. And what happens if you over sand, you will lose all of the tooth on your shell, and your pencil marks will not even grip. So if you are going to draw on your gourd before you start burning, you have to keep that in mind, that you still want to have enough of a tooth on your gourd for your pencil to grip to. And the other thing that could do is if you sand it too much and you can get a nice glassy smooth finish on a gourd. If you also plan on using some inks or dyes or acrylic paints over top of it, that is going to affect how that paint looks on it as well. So when I do my sanding, I do very little. It's just enough to make sure that it's nice and smooth. And some gourds are quite smooth already and don't really need it at all. But I'll still just do a little bit. And this isn't much. It's just a little bit. And then you want to make sure that you clean all that dust off. Now, sometimes what I'll do is, if I'm working on a piece where I know there's a border around it, and I'm doing like a vignette type of thing, I will just sand right inside that vignette and then color the rest of the gourd later, because if it's unsanded around the back, actually the paints will grip a little bit better. So it's a yes and a no with the sanding. Just lightly with a fine grit is really your best route. Just be careful not to over sand. Okay, so my next tip is to have some practice shards that you can check your temperature of your pens on before you start working on your finished art piece. So if you don't check your temperature first, you are running a great risk of burning your gourd too hot to start, and then once you do that, you can't fix it. You can't get that back. There's no erasing when it comes to gourd pyrography. So I always keep one of these handy. I'll just show it to you a little bit closer. And you can see I've been checking my lines and my shading on these pieces, and I'll just have my my burner to the temperature that I would normally have it on, check it, make sure it's not too hot, and then take it to my gourd. So that's always good to have a practice shard handy for you to check that gourd or that temperature of your pyrography pen. Okay, my next tip is kneaded erasers. So my little buddy, the kneaded eraser. If you've never used one of these before, you can get them in any arts and crafts store, but you can mold them. They're kind of sticky. And what I use them for is, I'll just show you this right here. I've got a gourd that I'm about ready to burn on, and I have my graphite for my pencil drawing on here. And when I start burning on it, I'm going to go through and just lift some of that excess graphite off, and you just put it on, and it's so sticky it'll just lift off. Now I'm not actually erasing it, the image is still there, but I'm lifting that excess off, and what that does, it just makes it a nicer surface to work on when you start burning. If you have too much graphite, it's going to gum up your pens. So this just gives it just takes off that extra that you don't really need. Okay, now we are on to tip number 5, which is probably my most important tip for you today and ever. I will repeat this over and over again to all of my students, and that is, please, please, please turn your heat down. Many mistakes that beginners make, and even some seasoned pyrographers make, is by burning too quickly, too fast, too hot. So what you want to do is have your burner set just hot enough that you get a good burn, and we can go back to these practice shards again to be checking that. You can always build up your tonal values slowly, build them up and make them darker. But if you make it too dark too fast, you're not going to be able to get that back, even if you sand it. And sanding it does not really do a good job anyway. So in order to try to avoid making those mistakes, keep your burner set as low as it possibly can be set to still get a good burn. Don't rush it. take your time, have some patience, put on music. You'll get a nice, relaxing, therapeutic time if you just turn the heat down, and you'll be much more happy with your final product. So all that being said, I know that there are some of you out there that are going to hear me and they're still going to burn hot. They're going to burn hot and they're going to have a lot of smoke when they burn. So if you're one of those people and don't want to listen to that tip, that's fine. But please protect yourself from the smoke. So whether you wear a mask or you have a fan that is blowing away from you, or I like to use sometimes an air purifier, not because I have a lot of smoke when I burn, because there's hardly any smoke when I burn. And usually that is an indicator that I'm burning too hot. When I do see smoke, I tend to, if I do that, I will pull back on that heat. But I do keep an air purifier if maybe my allergies are bothering me or something, and I just don't want to have further irritation. So I'll set up my purifier, and if there is any irritants in the air, that is going to pull that away from my lungs. So please keep your health in mind and be safe when you burn your gourds. All right, my next tip is keeping your pens clean. And I understand that there are some pyrographers who prefer to have dirty pens. Ugh, I don't know why. But I like to keep my pens nice and shiny clean, and I use a couple of different things that I use for that. But you want to try to keep that carbon buildup off your pens. And what happens if your pens get too full of carbon buildup, it's going to interfere with the actual burning of the pen as it makes contact with the gourd. And on top of that, sometimes that carbon will kind of burn up and fall off, and you don't want that falling on you or on your tabletop or into your lap. So it's really best to keep your pens as clean as possible. So what do you use to clean your gourds? And I know there's a lot of different methods out there. What I prefer is the most gentlest way that you can keep your pens clean without scraping down your metal tips. So what I mean by that is I try to stay away from using harsh abrasives. Some people like to use steel wool or sandpaper. I think that's a little bit too abrasive. What I use generally is just a piece of cloth, a thick cloth like jean material, which is usually what I'm wearing, jeans. But instead of, I've been trying to not do that, putting a hot pen on my leg, though I have, guilty as charged, but I did cut up some old jeans so that I have this nice material to wipe the hot pen on. Now, if the pen's getting really bad and I need to do something a little bit more than that, I make sure I have my pen turned off, and I use this piece of, it's a piece of leather that's just attached to a wooden board, and I've been using this for years. There's a little bit, I don't know if you can see the shine, you see that gray that's on there, and there is a tiny bit of a stropping oil that has like I don't know what the stuff is. It's like a granite or something that's ground way down. So it does have a little bit of an abrasive quality to it, but it's so thin and fine on here, and when I've painted it on, because it's a paint that you can put on it, you let it dry, and it lasts for a really long time, and it's just enough to clean your pen nice and shiny, but without wearing down that metal too much. So I wish I could tell you exactly what the stuff was that I bought, but I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so this is what it looks like. You can see how the oil separated a little bit, and you can see that gray granulated substance in here. And I'm pretty sure you can just go to a sportsman's store where maybe you can buy supplies for sharpening knives. I think this is just a very fine stropping oil is what this is. And just ask them for something that's very fine, and a very fine grit. And I'll show you what I do with it. So what I do is I just take a small amount here and paint it onto my leather strop or my leather piece, and then let it dry. And this, I've had this same bottle for the 25 years that I have been doing this art. I also give a little bit to everybody at my classes if they want some. So this little bottle has lasted 25 years for my use and for all of my students of, well, I haven't been teaching for 25 years, more like 20. So a little goes a long, long way. All right, my next tip is how to hold the gourd while you are burning the gourd. My favorite way of holding the gourd while I'm burning the gourd is just right in my lap. That's where I get the most control. Sometimes, well, oftentimes when I'm working on a gourd for filming for an online class or for YouTube, I'll have to work on top of the table. And let me tell you, it's very awkward. So if you hold the gourd in your lap, you will have much more control, which leads me to my next thing, which is, let's see, that was 8. So here is 9. My tip number 9 is rolling your gourd. So while your gourd is in your lap, and let's say you want to make a line from top to bottom or go around, you can hold it in your lap and roll your gourd. So what you're going to do is keep your pen more or less stationary, and then you're going to be moving your gourd instead. And you will find you'll have a lot more control over what you're doing than trying to inch your pen along. You're going to take it and you're just going to roll that gourd. Much, much, much easier. Okay, I think this is our, well, it's not quite the last tip. I'm going to give you a bonus tip. So here's tip number 10, which is use a good UV protectant for your finished pyrography. So everybody knows, and if you don't, I'm going to tell you, pyrography fades. Sad to say, it's one of those artworks that you have to be very careful about, that you don't want to display your finished pieces in sunlight. And one thing that you can do to help slow down that fading process is to use a good finish that has a UV protectant in it. And these are the ones that I like to use. It is the Krylon UV resistant clear acrylic coating, and it comes in matte and gloss. And I've used a few different kinds, but the Krylon one is my favorite, and I found that it does a really good job. All right, so my last tip, my bonus tip, is it's going to sound a lot like common sense, but from somebody who worked with bad lighting for a long time, please do yourself a favor and get some good lighting. So whether if you have a studio to work in, that's awesome, or if you just have like a little corner somewhere, at least make sure that you have some good lamps that are situated in a way that you are, one, not getting glare on your work, and two, not creating a shadow of your hand or your pen onto the work while you're trying to look at it and see what you're doing. It's really hard if you yourself is creating a shadow. So do yourself a favor. You'll be much happier if you have some good lighting to work under. All right, that concludes my tips for today, and I probably have a handful more tips that I can share with you, but I'll save them for another video. So until next time, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it helps you. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I'd be happy to make a video about that, or maybe compile a few of your questions together to answer in a future video. So until next time, happy gourding and happy burning. Take care.